Oh, it is recording. It didn't tell me it's recording. Usually I get a little voice that says, you are now recording to the cloud. But it's recording now. Okay, so I want to go over a couple of new, I want to go over something that we talked about before, because part of the assignment is going to be writing a little kind of description, writing a paragraph or so. It may be a little bit longer than a paragraph, like a page. Just going over some of the symptoms of groupthink and how to avoid them. Again, if you're on the road to nowhere or on the road to Utah, it won't be due immediately. So you'll have a week to do it. So there'll be plenty of time. It's not going to take a long time, so it won't take you away from your baby, Patrick, too much. The other thing that I'm going to have you do along with that is I want you to go over a worksheet or two. And basically, it's just identifying fact versus opinion, because that's one of the things that is very difficult to keep straight. What's a fact? What's an opinion? So let me start. There were 6 symptoms of groupthink. Remember that groupthink is when we identify with a group, or we are working closely with a group, and we don't want to cause waves within the group. And I talked about these last time, but I'll talk about them again. So the first one is called rationalization. So rationalization is basically when a group convinces themselves that the decision that they have come to is the best one, even though there may be evidence to the contrary or evidence against it. Or, and why? Why does that happen, or how can we avoid that happening? Really, the best way to ensure that is to ensure that there's some kind of process in place that is objective, or how do I put this? That there's a way to check the assumptions behind the decisions that the group comes up with that isn't based on a single person speaking out. Because we talked about how in a group, individuals tend to be pushed down, and if they don't agree with the group, a lot of times they are seen as not being a team player or a group member, and some negative things can happen to an individual that speaks out that causes individuals to just shut up and not say anything. So we should have some kind, groups should have some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Some kind of, not plan, some kind of, I don't know why I can't think of it. It's not a policy, but it's close to the word policy. It's
procedure.
Procedure. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yay. That's the word I'm looking for. There should be a procedure in place that we can automatically review the assumptions that we made, that we based our decisions on, or that we base the opinions on that is non-partial or right, it happens, it goes into effect automatically. That way no one person is singled out for being the one, oh crap, we have to do this again, are you kidding me, right? So we don't have a negative connotation. The group doesn't encourage that or discourages a negative connotation towards an individual. And that process should also make sure that the group is exploring alternatives and not just the facts or opinions that reinforce their already kind of come to decision. A lot of times with groups, large groups, small groups, doesn't matter. There's already a direction and a kind of a point that everybody thinks that this is kind of going to logically. And so we have that inherent bias. Remember, we talked about bias. That kind of makes things that support our decisions and arguments more important, or we evaluate them as being more important than facts or opinions that conflict with what it is that we want to come up with. So that kind of a process should be in place. Peer pressure is the second symptom of groupthink. And that has to do with members of the group pressuring everybody to have a uniform opinion or penalize members. So there's a penalty, some kind of penalty. It doesn't have to be, oh, you have to go stand in the corner kind of a penalty. For people who raise objections or raise other opinions or facts that don't mesh with the group. So groups love group harmony, and they like to, everybody, we all have to be lemmings and we all have to fit in a particular category, and everybody has to be uniform in that group. And so when you have individual members that are saying, hey, we didn't look at this, or hey, we didn't do this, peer pressure will kind of keep those people down. And for a couple of reasons. Either there's just a social pressure, or it can even go as far as being, you get penalized. And we talked about how, you know, some group members might get assigned to do tasks that are considered the crappy tasks to do. Yeah, why don't you do the note cards? I don't want to do that. It could be as simple as that. It could be in a work environment, you know, having to do kind of the jobs nobody else wants to do. You get assigned those things. And that keeps you in the future from quote unquote making the same mistake and speaking out against the group. It discourages a full exploration of, yeah, protocol is also good. A good exploration of all of the facts. It can even go so far as the person who is raising new ideas or different ideas and challenging the group thinking process to being ostracized from the group, being excluded from the group. You're no longer in our group. You're too much of a pain in the ass. And that happens a lot. Another thing that happens within groups, how do we fight peer pressure? We try to encourage people to speak up. And instead of penalizing them, we try to make a concerted effort to maybe reward those people. We have to understand that when we're trying to come to some kind of consensus, that not everybody is going to agree, and we should encourage, you know, people to speak out and raise new ideas or things that the group hasn't thought about, new facts and figures. And by the way, no issue is ever completely settled 100%. There's always new information that can come in. Even in science, where, you know, we talk about certain things being, well, it's done. We've looked at this for 100 years, you know, blah, 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 and this and that. And then all of a sudden somebody says, hey, Pluto is not a planet, right? And then all of a sudden people have to rethink, you know, very basic assumptions about scientific things, anything. But Pluto came to mind. So we should always try to not discourage people from speaking out. Should always be encouraged. Okay, so then there's complacency. A lot of people just, like I said, what is one of the things that is common among human beings? That's we tend to be, in the long run, we like to do less work. We like to think less. We like to just have somebody else tell us what's right and what's wrong, and we'll just go along with that. That's called complacency. And complacency also, because let's say that you know, I'm kind of everybody, I'll just use me. Let's say I'm a little bit lazy, and I'm just going to assume that all of the decisions of the group are correct because nobody else is speaking out within the group. There may be people outside of the group that are speaking out, but remember that once we identify with a certain idea or a certain group of people, we really have a vested self-interest to keep ourselves on the kind of moral high ground. We're right, they're wrong. Which brings us to how do we combat that? Well, complacency should be combated by encouraging people to speak up again. So it's kind of the same thing as peer pressure, although there's a little subtle difference, because most people who are complacent just assume that because nobody else is saying anything, that everything must be correct. So, and a lot of people who just go along with a group don't actually they want other people to think for them, because that's easier. It's easier for me to have a group of people come up with an opinion and evaluate all of the evidence for and against, and come up with an opinion and then just agree with it without doing any work on my own. That's much easier. So in order to combat complacency, again, groups should encourage people to speak up. They should encourage, hey, this is our opinion, but don't see it as the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Check for yourself. Then we get into the next symptom, which is moral high ground. And again, this all kind of fits together a little bit, so a lot of these overlap just a tiny bit. But basically is when morality is used as a basis for decision making, that causes the pressure to conform to the group to become even greater than just peer pressure. Because none of us as individuals want to be seen as being immoral. So how do we combat that? Well, it's difficult to combat as a group, but it is important for individuals that feel part of the group, that when they start hearing this kind of rhetoric about how, you know, this position is the morally superior position. This is the position that is correct, and anybody that disagrees is not moral. We assign other attributes to people who don't agree. For instance, if you have an argument with somebody else, and you have a reasoned argument, and they have a reasoned argument, it used to be, hey, we just disagree. We don't agree on, how to go about addressing the homeless situation. Your argument is reasoned, but I don't agree with it. The problem with taking the moral high ground becomes when, hey, you know what? We agree on a way to fix the homeless problem, and our way is correct. And anybody who doesn't agree with our way is immoral. So therefore, their argument isn't even valid. Hell, I could even say that they are evil, because what they're going to do isn't going to work. And we've decided it isn't going to work. How do we know it isn't going to work? Have they tried it? Hey, you guys have been doing this for 20 years your way, and it doesn't work. Now, that's kind of a rational argument against, right? But if I say, hey, you haven't tried your way, but we're not even going to listen to your way because you guys don't agree with us. You guys are immoral. You guys are evil. So instead of saying, hey, we disagree, I don't say we disagree, because I don't even have to, your argument isn't even valid. You're not even allowed to say anything about it. So the only way, and by the way, this tends to be fairly obvious. So for individuals within a group, you can tell very quickly that the group is taking the moral high ground, because they'll say things like, hey, these people are evil. And because they hold this opinion, they're evil. Because this is their argument, they're evil. Not because of the things that they've done. Right? And by the way, let's say that somebody is a serial killer and they've killed 100 people, and we can all agree that they are evil, and let's say they're in jail, and we know that if they were let out of jail, they would kill more people, and they have said that they do it just for the fun of it. So we can be fairly certain that they are evil, right? Does that necessarily mean that they couldn't come up with a rational argument about an opinion about how to solve the homeless crisis? No. If they have, right, you can't say, hey, you're a serial killer, your argument is invalid just because you're a serial killer. Does that sort of make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Yes?
Would that be for every argument? Or say he was trying to argue,
okay,
I should be let out of prison, but I'm a serial killer.
Yeah,
Could that be a good? Okay.
It's not for every argument, obviously. But maybe they should be let out of prison. Maybe I don't know. We can crawl down the rabbit hole on my example, and start to go into details. But my point is that just because you are, even, the majority of people think you're evil, doesn't mean that you can't have valid ideas about things. So the moral high ground, I'm just trying to say, even if that was valid, it wouldn't, even if we said, hey, we're going to make a moral judgment on people, that shouldn't keep us from listening to their arguments, because they might be right about stuff, is my point. They might not like, okay, so that was my serial killer argument. I don't want to use an example with like Nazis or something. But even Nazis could be right on some stuff.
Well, I mean, could
Not,
you use like past presidents who owned slaves? Like, we know that's a terrible thing, but some of those presidents were successful.
well, yeah. Yeah, that, okay. So there's a kind of a big thing going on right now with kind of our founding fathers, and some of them owned slaves and some of them didn't. Um, is that a separate issue from other things that they accomplished in their lives or did? We have to figure out how much we weigh that. Is everything negated because they did something bad? Right? So, and by the way, that becomes very difficult because you have to also take into consideration the time frame that they were in. But I will tell you this: think of our own lives, and have all of us. And I realize I'm not equating that with slavery, this with slavery, but you could take that so far that nobody's opinion is valid because we've all done things that we wish we hadn't done, and maybe we've done bad things, but we don't anymore. I know that most of you are fairly young, but I am not that young anymore. And I know that I did stuff when I was a teenager or in my 20s that some of it wish I hadn't. And I would rather not anybody find out about it. But if somebody does find out about it, does that, it's not something that things that I wouldn't really talk about and share because I'm not proud of them. And let's say that, somebody finds out about it. Does that make all of my opinions invalid? All of the things that I've done since, are they invalidated because I made a mistake or two or three at some point? So we have to be very careful about taking that moral high ground. The moral high ground is a very dodgy thing to jump into. It's like the old saying, be careful about throwing stones in a glass house, right? Because we tend to say, hey, you have done this and you have done that and you have done this, forgetting that we've also done things that aren't, the greatest things in the world. So you have to be careful when you're really morally judging other people, and therefore discounting either all of the things that they have done or discounting their opinions about things. And like I said, my serial killer example is kind of a extreme example of that. Somebody who's a serial killer could very well come up with a better way to collect the trash, right? Because there's no real connection between those things. Now, our founding fathers are a little bit less, a little bit more complicated to separate, but we also have to evaluate what time period that they lived in. One of the things that was commonplace even more recently was blackface. In the 20s and 30s, that was a very common practice, but now that's completely unacceptable. So, did people that used blackface in the 20s and 30s, did they do it because it was just a common thing to do? Or did they do it because they were actually denigrating Black people? Did they even think about it at the time because it was so commonplace? Does that make sense? Hell, even when I was a kid, the different terms for referring to, and I don't know why I think it's because you mentioned slavery, but the different terms that were used to describe Black people that were okay to use in society. That has changed, right? Now it's African American. You can't use, certain words when referring to, you can say Black, right? Black people, African Americans. I don't know what some of the other terms are, because I just call people by name. So normally, I don't tend to refer to big groups, really. But those terms have changed over time. What is when we talk about how women were viewed in society, those views, the normal views, the everyday views that were acceptable in the 20s or 30s or 40s, hell, even in the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 70s, a lot of those views are no longer views that we find acceptable. But does that mean that my dad, because he held those views, because he was born in 1920, and grew up in that time frame, was an evil person because he held some of those views because they were kind of normal and they weren't being challenged as an evil person? It all depends on what he did. So you see what I mean? We have to be careful when we judge people. So the moral high ground, I didn't mean to get sidetracked, but I did a little bit. But the moral high ground is a very, very shaky place to be in, because you're basically putting yourself up here. And remember that when you think you're up here, you got to be careful that you don't fall down. So, so anyway, how do we avoid that? Well, we really, if you're an individual, you should look very carefully when you are part of a group that is really taking the moral high ground, because the Nazis took the moral high ground. Okay, we talked about the Spanish Inquisition, right? That was part of the Catholic Church. And by the way, I am Catholic, or I was at least raised Catholic. And that they took the moral high ground. The people who burned witches in the Salem witch trials, they had the moral high ground. So we have to be very careful about being part of that group. It's not that you can't be, and they may be. It may be valid that they are, or more, but you have to be very careful. Stereotyping, which has to do kind of once you take the moral high ground, it's very easy to stereotype the other people that aren't in your group, don't share your same opinions. You see the outsiders as being inferior. And we can assign negative characteristics to those to discredit the people. So instead of, and so this is what stereotyping and taking the moral high ground kind of lead to. Instead of saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to disprove your argument with facts and figures and with a reasoned argument. So here is, your position is A and my position is B, and I'm going to write a paper that is reasoned and logical and uses critical thinking and disproves your argument. Instead of doing that, I say that you're morally inferior, or you are I'm trying to think of something else that we call other people. I tend not to be very nasty to other people, so I don't call names. You're racist. You are sexist. You're anti-Semitic. And because you are these things, I don't even have to argue your argument. I don't have to come up with a logical reasons for my beliefs, because I don't have to disprove yours, because yours are evil because of some characteristic that I have assigned you, something that's negative. And by the way, it's very easy because I don't know why the Nazis keep popping up into my head, but it's very easy to make a rational argument against a lot of policies that Nazis believe in. It's not hard to have a reasoned argument against, racism. It's very easy to come up with that instead of just saying, hey, you're a Nazi. I don't even need to, we don't need to talk about you're a Nazi. So your opinion on how to pick up the trash better is invalid. Or you once hired an illegal immigrant to do your yard. Therefore, your opinion on how to better run this business is invalid. Does that sort of make sense? Yes, Destiny, I will post this at some point. Okay. So that's stereotyping. Again, we have to be how do we avoid that? We have to be aware that it's happening in our group. And if we, that's a bad thing. We don't want people to stereotype us. So why would it be okay for us to stereotype others? Anytime your group is doing something that you wouldn't want others to do to you, that should cause us to think about maybe not the positions that we hold, although it should, but is the group that I feel that I belong to, should I reevaluate that? Because the group isn't doing things. So maybe that, I don't know, I can't think of an example. And then lastly, we have the illusion of unanimity or uniformity. And so a lot of times groups think that their ideas are unanimous just because no one is speaking out against it within the group. And again, that kind of goes back to peer pressure and complacency and taking the moral high ground and the stereotyping that happens. All of that stuff suppresses active arguments, not just against, but even just different ways of thinking about something. You could agree, but you just want to look at some other facts, and even that gets suppressed. So all of these things have some very, they're not easy things to do to kind of counteract those, but we just have to be aware that that's how group dynamics works. And when we feel like we're part of a group, we have to be very careful about that. When we see some of those things happening, it's time to start reevaluating, if not the positions that the group holds and why they hold those positions. If you're not going to do that, you should start thinking about, should I really identify with this group anymore? Should I really be part of the group? Because I don't like how the group is acting. Maybe their conclusions are correct, but I don't like how they're going about getting it. So avoiding groupthink, again, we talked about some of these. So having a process in place for checking the assumptions behind decisions. So having some kind of methodology to do that. That doesn't penalize individuals. Explore the alternatives thoroughly. Encourage people to challenge ideas that the group is kind of coming up with so that we can reevaluate and make sure that our ideas are based on good reasoning. Re-examine, have a process again in place to re-examine ideas that were rejected, to reevaluate and go, okay, yeah, we can really kind of check this off the list. Um, make sure that that the group is gathering information from outside resources and not just gathering information from within the group's own resources, so that there are varying ideas. Because again, the group there's a lot of pressure to conform. So a lot of internal resources are going to conform just because of all of those pressures. Make sure that you invite other people to critique, to debate. Right? If you have an opinion and you won't debate it with anybody on merit, on having a reasoned argument and be able to debate somebody else, it probably means that you can't. Right? So we should invite that. Outsiders typically have different ideas. One, two, three, four, five. Moral high ground. I'm just answering Alexander's chat room question. And just always be aware of the signs of groupthink. There should be some kind of again, a process or a policy or a rule in place. Yes, stereotyping. Okay, so here are the 6: rationalization, peer pressure, complacency, moral high ground, stereotyping, and the illusion of unanimity. And again, a lot of these things kind of fit together, so a lot of them are a little bit difficult to separate out. Okay, so that's groupthink. And see, we have a couple of minutes, so I want to talk about, I have different papers over here. I want to talk about facts and opinions. Because a lot of times, or what's an argument basically? A lot of times we're listening to people argue and we agree or disagree, but how do we evaluate an argument? So there's actually different parts of an argument. And this is good to remember in kind of your everyday life. So typically an argument, whether it's from an individual or a group, it doesn't matter, has a claim. So there's a point that's being made. And the claim is the thing that's being argued for. Or the subject. So that's called the claim. It's like the thing that the people are arguing for. Second, we have the evidence. So the evidence is basically the grounds on which the claim is being made. So these are the arguments for it. These are the facts and figures. A lot of times it's called supporting evidence. So here's the thing that I claim is true, and here's my supporting evidence. So the thing that is true is called the claim, and the supporting evidence is called the evidence. The things that I use to validate my claim. Now, we have the evidence, the facts and figures, or whatever kind of evidence that I'm using, and we have the claim, which it's supporting, right? And those are two separate things. And so there is what we call a warrant, or the warrant. And this one is a little bit tricky, but the warrant is the thing that, the logical process that connects the claim with the evidence. So sometimes if you listen to like a 5-year-old make an argument, or a 4-year-old make an argument, they will have a claim, and then they'll have some evidence, and then we as an adult go, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't flow. Your arguments don't flow. The evidence doesn't support your claim, whatever it might be. So that's what's called the warrant. It's, does the claim flow from the arguments being used, from the evidence being used? Is it actually supporting evidence? And does the supporting evidence actually support the claim? Does it flow logically? So that's what's called the warrant. And then lastly, we have the qualifications. So let's say that I am doing some research and I have a claim that I want to make. So I go out and I find a bunch of evidence and I look at the warrant part, which is the logical connection between my evidence and my claim. And I may have to qualify my claim based on the evidence. So that's part of good analysis, is that now I'm saying, hey, you know what? My evidence doesn't really support my claim 100%. So I need to qualify well, it says here that I have to qualify what my claim is. I might have to limit my claim based on either the warrant, the logical connection. Well, maybe it's not so logical as I thought. Or because my evidence doesn't fully support my claim. So then I need to modify it. So that's called a qualification. And those are what good arguments will do. They will use all of that stuff, and then they will self-qualify if necessary. So that's important. And then lastly, what time is it? I have like 3 minutes, I think. I have like 2 minutes, but it's okay. So that's what an argument is. And that's what a real argument is. So facts and opinions. A fact, and by the way, that's the evidence part of an argument. So we have to evaluate when we are trying to say, evaluate the claim. Is the claim valid or not? You have to evaluate the evidence. And is the evidence based on fact or on opinion? A fact is something that you can prove. So if I say that the desk that I'm sitting at is white, that is not an opinion. That's a fact. And why is it a fact? Because I can prove it very simply by doing this. See? Well, I know. But see, my desk is white. There's a light on the ceiling of my room. That's a fact, right? All I got to do is show you that, hey, this is the room. Maybe my room it's the office, office/guest room. There's a bed in here too. I could prove that. That's not an opinion. An opinion would be something like Jerry Seinfeld is the funniest man alive. Right? Because that's not fact. That's an opinion, right? People have opinions about stuff all the time, and so we have to be careful about separating fact from opinion, because a lot of times they're difficult to tell apart. So part of your assignment is going to be trying to identify what is a fact and what is opinion. And it's a bit of a brain teaser. So it's just something to have you think, that's all. So having said that, before I leave, I will tell you that I will post the assignment on Blackboard. I haven't done so yet, but it'll be on our main page somewhere. And yes, there is lab. We will have labs today. I'm going to go over what it is that you need to do, but I will post it sometime later today. Like I said, you're going to have like a week or 10 days. What's today? Today is Thursday. I may give you till like not next Thursday, but the Tuesday after that. So it'll be a little bit longer than that, but to finish it and turn it in. But you won't need anywhere near that amount of time, okay? But I'm just being kind of cool. So I'll post it and I'll send out an announcement when it's all posted, okay? So having said that, are there any questions or comments or anything before I leave? You sure?